Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host Rashid, and right now we're waiting for author, analyst, and commodities investor Alex Krainer to join us on the platform. I just want to give you a little information of the little setbacks we're having. There is a little difference in time. He is on European Central European time, and I'm on Central Standard Time, and so we came to the conclusion that maybe we weren't sure that maybe that 11 o'clock this time was the right time. So give him a little time, give him 10 to 15 minutes, and if he's not on then I'll hit him, I'll shoot him a message and we'll try to go. But until then, we're gonna start chopping it up. And I see my guy Joel Bradford is in the building. I knew the building was shaking for a reason. I knew the building was like rattling for a reason because we got one of my troopers for truth up in here. Joel, what's up, my guy? Everybody, the name of the show is called Global Finance and Geopolitics with Alex Krainer. Now, hold on 1 second while we're talking. Let me see if I can hit him up real quick. Give me 1 second. You know how things are, Alex. Okay. He just hit me up. He said he'll be with me in a few minutes. Cool. Let's see. Man, I was going to do here, but all right, cool. He hit me up. So, just give him a little time. He'll be here. He said he'll hit me up, and he's going to be on in just a few minutes. Again, that time difference throws people off. I'm just glad that he chose to be on the show, because I'm trying to give you guys some of the best guests, some of the most enlightened people, some of the people who are the biggest authors, investors, analysts, or whatever. That's what I'm trying to give you all, and I'm trying to do it with an honest take, no biases. It's hard to do it without any biases, but I like to prove my point. Ascended Awakening is in the building. Salute, Ascended Awakening. Thank you for joining me this early for some of you all. I know it's early for some of you all, and I know it's still late for some of you all because all of us are on different times. Alex just hit me up. He'll be in the building in just a few minutes, okay? And also, let me say, if you see me doing this right here a lot on the show right now, my sinuses are killing me. My sinuses are killing me. My eyes are watering constantly. All right. So, but let's go into it because until he gets here, I want to, because I'm gonna ask him about this also. There was an article that came out on the 12th of November. All right. We know today is the 13th, and the article was titled "Horsemen of the Economic Apocalypse." Friday's U.S. debt forecast has shocked traders and bankers. And what's amazing about that is I've been telling you guys about the four horsemen and the apocalypse, the economic, political, and geopolitical apocalypse, and how America fits the description of that fourth horse, that fourth rider of the apocalypse, right? And so it's amazing that the title of this article is Horsemen of the Economic Apocalypse. See, I told you, they listen. They may not give us credit over here, but they listen. And it says, Friday's U.S. debt forecast has shocked traders and bankers. And it goes like this. Credit rating agency Moody's hit the panic button as the U.S. debt overlook takes a dive to negative. Now, here's something right here. As we wait for Alex Krainer to join us, which again, for those of you who are just joining us, he just hit me up and said, give him a few more minutes. He's getting ready. He'll be here. But listen. Oh, here he is in the building. So I'll get to ask Alex this in just a second. So without further ado, let me bring him on stage. And I got to thank him for joining me on this podcast. Thank you, Alex, for joining. Oh, your mic. We can't hear. And it's telling me it's on your end. Well, as he's fixing his mic, and he can. Oh, it almost came on. I can't hear Alex. Let's see. maybe go out and come back in because it's blocking you. Okay, okay. Um, but the credit rating for this, it says credit rating agency Moody's hit the panic button as the U.S. debt overlook takes a dive to negative. Now here's something. Here's something that we all should look at. Why did it take so long for the credit rating to take a dive when you are constantly deficit spending? When your tax base has collapsed, when your manufacturing base has collapsed, when you produce little to nothing, and yet you are spending 20, 30, 40 times, 50 times over what you take in. Any sound bank, any sound credit union, any sound lender would not lend out or continuously lend out to a person that is overburdened by debt. Why does other countries with a fraction of this get downgraded quickly? And why has it taken so long for America to be downgraded economically, right? It shows you the biasness of these international corporations and these banking institutions, because anyone else, they would have been had a negative a downgraded. I see Alex up there. I'm going to bring on the screen right now. Let's see if we can get it. Yes,
Can
yes.
you? Oh, excellent. I apologize. For some reason on my PC, it didn't work, so I had to log in on my phone. I hope this. I'll have to work out how to.
It looks good.
It looks good.
Alex,
excellent.
All right. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time out. I was telling everybody I'm on Central Standard Time. You're on Central Eastern. European time. So we were trying to get those times in. Would you please tell the people a little bit about yourself before we go further into the show?
Okay. So first of all, Rashid, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join you today. I'm Alex Krainer. I'm Croatian national, so I'm from Croatia originally. I live today and have done for the last 27 years in the Principality of Monaco, which is at the Mediterranean coast south of France. And over the last 25 years, I've worked as an oil trader and a hedge fund manager. And I'm an author. I published 3 books. I'm a banned author. Amazon has completely canceled me and deleted all my books. And generally, I cover not only markets and investing, risk management, things like this, but also history and geopolitics. Because working as a hedge fund manager, you kind of had to pay very close attention to the world, how it works, how it doesn't work. History is extremely important for us to understand in order to be able to appreciate where we are at today and where we might be going in the future. So that's me. I'm on Substack. My Substack is Alex Krainer's Trend Compass. And I also am easy to find on Twitter at Naked Hedgie. So that's me in a nutshell.
Well, Alex, I was just reading an article that came out yesterday, and I wanted to ask you a question on the article. It's titled "Horsemen of the Economic Apocalypse. Friday's U.S. debt forecast has shocked traders and bankers." In the first sentence, the first headline says this: credit rating agency Moody's hit the panic button as the U.S. debt outlook takes a dive to negative. I wanted to ask you, why did it take so long for this to happen, especially when the United States tax base has collapsed and her spending is just unimaginable?
Well, the credit ratings are political as well as economic, and I remember 15 or 20 years ago, the S&P, Standard & Poor's, downgraded the United States credit rating. And then there was such powerful political backlash against the S&P that they had to reverse themselves and reinstate whatever it was, AAA or A+++, whatever the rating is. They had to put the United States back at the top rating. But, this is not because the quality of U.S. Credit standing improved. It's because the agencies can be, pressured to give the United States the rating that the United States government believes that they deserve. I think that Moody's downgrade is probably correct, negative, right? Because the United States government today has surpassed $33 trillion in debt. It's paying more than $1 trillion in interest on that debt every year. We're just talking about the federal government's debt.
Mm-hmm.
If you add the private debts, households and businesses, you reach something like 90 plus, I think, $91 trillion in debt. These are absurd. These are preposterous numbers. And, an economy whose GDP is less than $33 trillion per year cannot have a top credit rating. That's just the boring math of it. But if you went to your bank and you were spending 3 times what you were earning, they wouldn't give you credit.
Right. That is exactly the example that I was using right before you joined us. I was telling the people, I was like, you try to go to the bank and you were spending 5, 10, 20, 30 times what you're putting in. They would send you out the door selling and tell you don't come back this way until you can get your debt under control. Why do you think that America continues to, because this is connected, the debt crisis and her provocative actions around the globe? Why aren't there any adults in Washington, D.C.? And why don't they look at the entire geopolitical situation and say, maybe if I pull back and stop antagonizing everybody, the very people who I'm dependent upon for their generosity to buy my debt, maybe they will buy more debt. But if I continue to antagonize them, they're going to sell the debt.
Well, that's centuries old stories of empires. For you and I, and for any ordinary person and ordinary business in the country, and I'm not in the United States, but the same principle applies everywhere. We could all get along really well, trade with one another, because there's stuff I would like to buy from American businesses, and there is stuff that American people would like to buy from, France, Croatia, China, wherever. And in that case, we could simply live in peace and trade with each other. And, if somebody spent too much and produced too little, their currency would get punished, their credit rating would get punished, exporting countries would be hesitant to export their goods to them because they would worry about getting paid and so forth. And then that country would have to maybe tighten the belt and improve their production or reduce their imports, and basic economic policy. The problem is that what you and I think about these things and the way you and I would deal with these problems is not the same when it comes to the imperial factions, which are basically the very narrow networks of powers that are clustered around the global banking cartel and the mega corporations that have grown up around them. Now, banking and empire usually go together, particularly the kind of banking and the kind of monetary system that we have in place today. And I'll try to explain in as simple terms as I can think of it. Basically, today's monetary system is, we have fiat currencies backed by nothing other than, trust and confidence. And we have fractional reserve banking, okay? All the money that goes into circulation represents debt. If there were no debt in the system, there would be no money in the system, zero, not a single dollar. And so for any money to be in circulation, somebody has to go into debt. Debt becomes assets on the books of the banks. So the banks, your debt is banks' assets. Your liability, right? That's the bank's assets. Now, given that the debt has to be paid back with interest, but only the principal goes into circulation, the whole system functions like a large Ponzi scheme, because the only way that you can pay your debt plus interest is to earn it from other people who have to go into debt for whatever reason, for consumption, for mortgages, for business development, for infrastructure development, whatever. But people have to keep going into debt, and the system is only stable for as long as it grows. So that's why we have this imperative of always growing the economy, the GDP growth, even when everybody's satisfied, everybody has everything they need, and maybe they only need to make minor purchases. There's always this imperative for the whole system to grow so that people go more into debt and buy more crap so that more crap can be produced. And the government has to keep going deeper and deeper into debt. That's symptomatic. That's across the world, every government, every nation that has this monetary system in place. And that's pretty much all nations in the world today. Now, what happens is that at a certain point, the system is saturated, right? Everybody maxes out on debt. You don't need more stuff. You don't need to go into debt to buy more stuff. And at that point, the system would begin to implode on itself because it's no longer growing. And at that point, what you need is to expand basically by taking other nations' resources as collateral. Because remember also, you can only grow the credit cycle for as long as you can keep adding healthy money, good collateral into the system. And once everybody's maxed out domestically, there's no further collateral that can be added to keep the system going. Or, maybe it's not enough, maybe it's too marginal. And at that point, if the Middle Eastern countries have plenty of oil, well, why not turn that oil into our collateral, and then our corporations can get into debt with our banks against that oil as collateral. Ditto for GMO crops. Ditto for gold mines, silver mines, coffee, cocoa plantations everywhere. So this banking system creates an incentive for nations that embrace it to become empires. Now, it's not a given that it has to be military expansionism, because in other nations, for example, I grew up in the communist Yugoslavia, same money system, same thing. The government was spending on big monuments, giving people high salaries, employing everybody. And the effect was the same. The system was unsustainable, but in the West, particularly Great Britain and the United States, the system has tended to go towards military interventionism and the expansion of empire. And this is what United States has adopted from its predecessor, which is the British Empire, which, once it began to collapse at the turn of last century, at the turn of the 20th century, 100 years ago or so, the British establishment simply decided to transfer its seat of power to Washington and New York to infiltrate and co-opt the democratic system of governance on the United States, and to help themselves to the wealth and military and diplomatic and political power of the United States to continue expanding their empire and to take all other nations' resources as collateral and to use all other nations' populations as a source of cheap labor. And that's where we're at today. So that's why for them, this logic of let's all get along and trade with each other, for them that doesn't work. They want other nations' collateral so that their money system can keep from imploding, so that it can keep expanding and growing.
That was beautiful. I'm telling you, that was a beautiful explanation, an in-depth, thorough explanation, and you made it where we could actually picture in our heads everything that you were saying. I mean, that's wonderful.
Oh,
But
thank you. I'm glad.
Would that qualify the United States, Great Britain, and the Western world as parasites in their system as being parasitic if they need a constant host body to extract the brain power, the resources, the technology, and everything to maintain their way of life?
Yes, absolutely. But but I would like to distinguish between the United States, the republic, with its legitimate democratic institutions of governance, the federal power, the state power, ordinary people and ordinary businesses, from this imperial faction, which today is perhaps most strongly represented by the neocon faction in the government. I was going to say in the Biden administration, but they were there during the Trump administration and Obama administration and the Bush administration and so forth, and all the way at the very least to the Reagan administration. They're always there, and they are extremely powerful in shaping the United States policy, and they are the ones who have that. First of all, they act on behalf of the banking establishment, right? We know today that it was Citigroup that staffed Obama administration, and then they pushed for this confrontation with Russia and Ukraine. That includes also the IMF, that includes the U.S. Treasury, and certain other agencies of the U.S. governments, which are completely infiltrated and co-opted, and which are actually the permanent power behind the throne or behind the presidency. So people, always vote against the war. They always voted for the anti-war candidate. Even George W. Bush was, in 2000, he was running on the platform of no more nation building and humble foreign policy. And then, the minute people voted him into the office, he turned around and, they created a pretext for war, and off they went to Afghanistan, to Iraq, and so forth. And so, it's not the American people, it's this structure of power. And this is the true enemy, not just of other nations around the world, but also of the American people, because I think that American people will notice that over the last 20 or 30 years, they've become a lot less prosperous, a lot less safe, a lot less secure. The quality of life has declined precipitously. And you can see that on the streets of U.S. cities like Baltimore and Pittsburgh and San Francisco and the Skid Row and so forth. So this is not the doing of the people, of the legitimate businesses and state governments and so forth. This is the effect of this oligarchy that's the ultimate beneficiaries of this monetary system that we have in place now.
Would you agree that the leadership or the oligarchy shows absolute contempt for the man and woman in the mud and the ones that are middle class and so-called poor class, due to the fact that, as I often say on the show, there was a congressional report by, I think not a congressional report, but a report by the HUD office in the U.S. government saying that it would only take $20 billion to completely eradicate homelessness across the board across the United States, and yet they can't find $20 billion for that. But they can constantly come up with these military appropriation bills for Ukraine and for Taiwan and to continue to stoke trouble. How is that even sound
Well, they have a whole media academic think tank universe that does nothing but produce justifications for exactly this. The media is trying to keep the homeless population invisible, and they're trying to portray them as unworthy, no good flunkies who probably deserve to be where they are. And I've even read things like, oh, it's a lifestyle choice, some people just like to live that way. And they actually say these things. And then also they keep fear mongering about all these despots and tyrants and dictators around the world that we have to go around and kill because they threaten our liberties and our national security and our national interests, which are never ever defined. How is it in anybody's interest to go fight a war in Ukraine and throw 100 and I don't know, when they tell you that they used $120 billion there, or 110 or 14, whatever the number is, I bet you the real number is probably double that, because they also lie and cheat and steal and fake their books. And then, every so often we find out that they can't square some $20 trillion that went through the Pentagon. So they're also constantly lying to us and lowballing the expenses and exaggerating the benefits. And I just, I had the displeasure just yesterday of participating in a Zoom call with Frank Gaffney. And Frank Gaffney, for your viewers' benefit, he has been on the circuit drumming up all the wars for the last 20 some years. He was one of the founders and signatories of the Project for a New American Century in the aftermath of 9/11 attacks. And then he's very close ideologically with Richard Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz and Bill Kristol and all of these people. And he's been one of the leading voices drumming out Islamophobia. For years, he's been trying to convince everybody that the greatest evil we're facing today is the rise of the global caliphate that's going to overtake the whole world, and we're all going to be living under Sharia law. And then last night, like nothing happened, the greatest evil facing the world today is the Chinese Communist Party. Like, boom, just like that. Just like in George Orwell's 1984, they switched from one war to the next like nothing ever happened. And now he's pitching the Red Scare against China, and he pushes every emotional, every fear button you can imagine. China is going to, literally, he's saying that the Chinese are preparing to depopulate much of the Western world, that they want to take it over, that they're going to turn it all communist and turn all the surviving populations into slaves. And the whole presentation with slides was about that. So, this is the... and then Frank Gaffney is all over the television. He goes on CNBC and NBC and ABC and everywhere, pitching this, convincing people that we need to go to war against China because otherwise they're going to take us over, depopulate us, and enslave us all. Well, China has never done that in all of their history. 3,000 years that they've never gone around colonizing the world, turning people into their slaves. And I confronted him, and I told him that Chinese have never done this, that he was pitching the Muslim scare before he was pitching the Chinese Red Scare, and that if we need to defend freedom and democracy and prosperity and all these things that he bloviated about, why not take a look at the U.S. cities today, the state of them, and then compare them to the state of the cities in China, and ask yourself who's doing better. Mm-hmm. And basically, he said I was a Marxist and a communist, which I'm not, because I escaped communism 30 years ago, and I spent 15 years of my life working as a commodities trader and a hedge fund manager. I'm not a communist, but I'm also not prepared to swallow the lies that end up getting us into war after war after war after war. And the United States, in this way, has initiated more than 80% of all wars fought in the world after 1946, from 1946 until now, 80% of all the wars. And why is that? It's not because American people particularly like going to war. It's because there's this system that creates incentive, that creates the propaganda, that deceives people, and that keeps funneling money to the military-industrial complex in order for the military to go fetch other nations' resources and labor power to turn them into financial flows in the West, which only enrich the oligarchy that's ruling.
Mhm. Like to thank everybody for joining us on all of the platforms, on Facebook, Rumble, Odyssey, Twitter, and YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us. And why do you think that they are so hell bent on leading the world to war, especially when they're at such a disadvantage from where they were after World War II? America and the European lackeys don't have the manufacturing capacity as we see it play out in Ukraine. They don't have the economic prowess that they once had. They don't have the political capital, and yet they continue to point when one operation fails, they turn without a second thought and go to the next operation. And when that fails, they go. And everybody's a despot, a tyrant, a dictator. And if you look at just the situation for 1 second in China, let's go back to what you said about how they were trying to put on you this jacket of being a communist. Why won't they just, and I'm no communist, I'm apolitical, all of that stuff, but why won't they look at and study China's rise and extract the benefits and throw away all the things that they don't want? Because China did something miraculous. They removed 850 million people from poverty to middle class.
Yeah.
Why can't that be a lesson for the so-called capitalistic West if it is what they say it is about wanting to secure prosperity for their own publics?
Well, I think that they have painted. First of all, they painted themselves into a corner. Namely, after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, I think that they have convinced themselves that they were the sole remaining superpower, that they controlled everything, and that they don't need to negotiate with anybody on anything remotely similar to fair trade terms, that they could just impose their will by force, and they could subjugate any nation into dependency and into subservient position. That they should all sell their resources to our corporations for bits of paper that we print, and if anybody didn't like it, well, we had as they call it, we have tools at our disposal, and those tools involved assassinations of leaders, military action, color revolutions, sanctions, blockades, embargoes, and all of these things. We've seen that with Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, many nations. Anybody who has anything to say against the system as it is, they get dealt with force. And I think that the rise of China took them, I'm not going to say that it took them unaware. Here's what happened with China. They created China, okay? Because they knew, 15th August 1971, Richard Nixon took the United States off of the gold standard. He broke the convertibility of US dollars into gold. And from that moment on, they knew that they were going to deplete the United States and that the whole imperial cabal would need a new host because the United States would become economically and militarily and in every other way, it would become depleted. And they have designated China as the next host to the empire. And within the year, Richard Nixon and Kissinger went to China and they started, opening China, and they started transferring credit and technologies and all kinds of everything to China to turn it into an economic superpower, because they were counting on China becoming their next global cup. And then this all kind of went south because with Xi Jinping as the new leader of China, well, already his predecessors were not on the same page with the global bankers. but this was not a given yet. But with Xi Jinping, it became clear that they did not control the Chinese Communist Party, that the Chinese Communist Party had, sorry, we should properly call it the Communist Party of China. I keep repeating the Frank Gaffney CCP thing, which is incorrect. So the Communist Party of China had their own ideas about how they want to develop and what kind of the world they want to create for future generations. And, scaremongering aside, it seems like a better world than what the Western powers have been creating, not only around the world, but also domestically, because all you have to do is look at the cities of Europe, cities of the United States, and you can see the trends that not only are we're losing health, we're losing prosperity, we're losing freedom, we're even losing health and life expectancy. So the system doesn't work. And what China is doing does work. Well, throughout history of empires, when the oligarchies found themselves pushed against the wall, because they would always end up depleting the local economies and turning the place into like a powder keg, they would always call for enemies at the gate. They would always start raising panic about the barbarians who are coming to sack our cities, whatever. So in that way, they could turn people's grievances, misdirect them towards a foreign enemy, recruit the male fighting age population to go fight the war, which is exactly the, segment of the population that is the greatest risk to them. And then, have a big bloodletting, slaughter them in large numbers, and even recruit the more capable of them and co-opt them into to your own cause to become the Praetorian guards of your establishment. And this has been going on for, since the Roman times, at least. Same thing. So always when they bring the crisis to the breaking point, they need enemies. They need to send people to war. And, as Frank Gaffney was saying last night, this is the greatest evil ever, and we need to go to war, and we need to pray. And so they just do this all the time. So that's where we're at today. However, something changed in the equation, and that is the internet. The fact that you and I can have this conversation, and that your viewers and listeners can take this on board and think it through, and maybe doubt whether they're telling us the truth, and maybe these Chinese are not so evil, and maybe we don't need to be panicked about them coming to sack our cities and enslave us all. This, I think, is a completely new element in this geopolitical equation. And it seems to me that their old playbooks are no longer working. People are questioning the playbook. People are questioning the agenda. And I think they're starting to wake up to the fact that the enemy is at home, that the enemy is not Russia, it's not China, it's not the Venezuelans, it's not the Muslims. It's at home. It's in New York, it's in Washington, it's in the city of London primarily. That's still where I think the ideology of the empire and the strategy of the empire originates to this day.
I am in total agreement with you on these things, especially on where the center of power lies. But I wanted to ask you concerning, since you're in Europe, what is the temperature of the people because of this deindustrialization due to sanctions and the constant sanction regime of the European? Matter of fact, let me just back because this is crazy here. You have some unelected officials putting the whole of Europe at risk and deindustrializing Europe for the sake of American and British hegemony. What is the temperature of the people on the ground about these lunatic policies?
I think that the European continent, and especially Western Europe, are on the verge of a massive social uprising. They're on the verge of revolution. And I think it's very difficult to predict how these things are going to roll around, because things may look normal day to day, and then you might have a sudden catalyzing event that changes everything. And I think that the governments in Europe are generally afraid of the people at this point, and they are, starting with these draconian censorship laws. They're trying to silence the opposition. They're arresting people for, saying, "Oh, maybe we need ceasefire in Gaza." That's enough to get you arrested. People are losing their careers and jobs and incomes for saying that there are only two genders. It's gotten crazy. In 1998, Terence McKenna said that the contradictions in our societies are so grave, and they are going to escalate to the point where it's going to reach the level of a fire in a madhouse. And I think we really are at the fire in the madhouse stage right now. Spain is up in arms. This is not so much in the media, but Spain is up in arms, and the government's about to fall. To the extent that the democratic institutions still work and matter, populists are being voted into power, and then the establishment media, rather than listening to them, they are labeling them as far-right extremists. Well, if you don't allow peaceful revolutions to happen, you might end up getting violent revolutions, and we've had those too in Europe. And there's been, the French have been good with their guillotines. They've been chopping heads wholesale, and God only knows, we've never been at this juncture in history, and so all of these things are still possible. We might have military coups. It's very hard to say, but the temperature is, I would say, the emotions are white hot.
Well, let's pivot over to Ukraine for a second. What is actually going on there, and do you believe that the West will continue to poke the bear until Russia takes over all of Ukraine?
I don't believe that Russia will take over all of Ukraine. But I do believe that they might take another several oblasts, and particularly the Odessa, the city of Odessa, and that oblast. Why? Because that way they will gain total control of the Black Sea, and also, very importantly, the control of the Danube River basin, where Danube flows into the Black Sea, which is strategically extremely important because it allows nations of Central Europe, like that are landlocked, like Serbia, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, allows them to trade through the Black Sea and the Mediterranean coast, and that way they cannot be easily sanctioned and blockaded by the European Union. And at that point, I think that the whole architecture of the European Union is going to start to come apart. The Russians will dictate the terms of peace, and the terms of peace are going to be very, very harsh for the West. Because if you recall, in 2021, in December, when the Russians tendered a draft treaty to the United States and to NATO, before they went to war in Ukraine, they were demanding that NATO pulls back to where it was in 1997, meaning that NATO will have to vacate many of the Eastern European nations where they went after 1997. And so all of this is coming our way, and I think that both NATO and the European Union are European Union certainly, but NATO also very probably, they're just going to collapse and come apart because they've lost all meaning, and the European Union is a complete abomination of a political entity. It's not a democracy by a long shot. It doesn't have any real power. It has the power of the purse over member nations, but that can be fixed. Creating a new currency and converting euros into that currency, and taking giving your own central banks control over your monetary policy, that's doable. That's not, rocket science. And I think that nations like Hungary, maybe Bulgaria, maybe Slovakia, maybe Poland, they're probably going to be pushed in that direction. Also, large old nations like France and Germany, they're essentially surrounded by hostile nations. Germany, which used to be European powerhouse, in politically and economically, is now surrounded by enemies. Basically, their relationship with France is rocky. With Poland, it's outright hostile. Nordic nations, same thing. And the only nation in the region that could be a dependable partner to Germany is Russia, actually. And I could say the same thing for France. And so I think it's only a matter of time before the political process will bring up to the surface parties and leaders who are aware of this fact and who are going to forge new relationships towards the East, towards Russia, towards Eurasian integrations, and coming together with this Belt and Road Initiative with China, and who are going to be cutting the cords of dependency with Britain and the United States.
Well, do you think Russia will allow a balkanized Ukraine to be used against it? Because if they take these regions, NATO might just, and they leave this part over here in the western part, NATO would just set missiles there and make the population even more hostile towards Russia.
Yeah, Russia is not going to allow that. But, the situation is very complicated because, the West, okay, so East Ukraine is and has been predominantly Russian-oriented, culturally, language-wise. They would have always voted in favor of pro-Russian option in their development and political alliances. But the west of Ukraine is rabidly anti-Russian. It's the home of all these, Nazis that have populated the Azov Battalion and other neo-Nazi paramilitaries. And in this population, you actually do have very rabid Russophobia, but they are also, historically, they have also been, parts of Western Ukraine have been parts of Poland. And Polish leadership does have ambition to reintegrate parts of Western Ukraine into Poland. Well, Western Ukrainians only hate Russians a little bit less than they hate the Poles. And so if Poland tried to reintegrate, Lvov and parts of Western Ukraine into Poland, that's going to be a bite that they're going to choke on. So, Poland might end up destabilizing itself, and in their struggle to reintegrate their historic territories that are now Ukraine, they might end up weakening themselves, and they might not need much help from Russia. So, even if there are powers in the NATO that want to turn whatever's left of rump Ukraine to, resharpen it to be the battering ram against Russia, it's going to be very difficult and very complicated, and it probably is going to end up not working. And Russia does have overwhelming military power on the Eastern Front, and you would have to have a very determined, very united front to try to beat the Russians on their Eastern Front. And that doesn't exist because the Western Ukrainians are rabidly anti-Polish as well as anti-Russian. So it's going to be extremely difficult. I would say it's going to be impossible. And when they lose Ukraine, they lost. They just lost. That's it.
And the reason I ask is because I see desperation starting to settle in with the NATO leadership, with the former NATO Secretary General saying that we should ignore all of the guidelines that we had and just start accepting parts of Ukraine into NATO, and this will force Russia to back off, or at least, or Russia would have to confront the entire alliance. What is your thinking on that?
They're making it up as they're going along, and they don't even have a game plan at this point. They're just you know those old cartoon when like the cartoon character fixes some machine and then there's like stuff left over, like nuts and bolts left over, and then they just shove it into the machine and close it. I think that's what they're doing now. They're just like shoving stuff, throwing it against the wall to see what's going to stick. And it didn't work when they took their sweet time to arrange all the pieces to confront Russia. It didn't work. It's not going to work now. And I think that they're just basically flailing to try to save an already lost war. And the important bit about Ukraine is that Ukraine has been the centerpiece for the Western Empire's hegemony over the Eurasian landmass. Ukraine has been their gateway to Eurasia, and also the ideal spot to try to weaken and destabilize Russia. Because obviously, you can't control the Eurasian landmass if you have rivals in the region that can defeat you militarily. Well, that ship has sailed. That's I think that's over, and they don't have any good options left. And I think that we're going to see a shaping of a very different world in the future, and we're going to see the outlines of it in our lifetimes. And I think that maybe the world that we talked about at the beginning, the world in which maybe we all just get along and trade with each other, maybe that world is going to start to actually take shape.
Well, why do you think we'll jump from that to China? Well, America's losing in the Middle East. We see she's losing, and her allies are losing out. We see her losing in Ukraine and Europe. Why would you jump from a hornet's nest into a bear's den and antagonize the very nation that is your number one investor, your number one trade partner, buys most of your treasury bonds? 93 to 95% of all goods on every shelf in America comes from China or a subsidiary of China. How is that a rational policy? How is that policy that is beneficial to the American people to jump from the hornet's nest into the bear's den as the bears awaken?
Well, the United States is not a monolith, and there are numerous factions trying to gain control of the foreign policy in the United States. So one problem that the Biden administration is facing now is that China is still one of the most important creditors to the United States, and also Chinese imports are one important mechanism of keeping inflation low in the United States. So both of those elements are important to the Biden administration because of the next year's elections. So, Biden administration and Janet Yellen in the Treasury, they would like for the Chinese to stop dumping U.S. treasuries and to preferably start buying U.S. treasuries. That would be a lot of help. They also need the trade flows from China to continue to, bring low-priced goods into the United States to try to keep the consumer inflation low. And then also, if they can salvage some part of their relationship with China, I think that they also have the idea of trying to use Xi Jinping to influence Vladimir Putin to try to formulate some kind of a war settlement over Ukraine that would look favorable to the United States, or at least not completely disastrous, so that the Biden can campaign on some semblance of success. Okay, so that's that part. But there's also the imperial faction that wants to destabilize China and to try to regain their hegemony over Eurasian landmass. You know, that's the old obsession that is still there, and this is why we still see, you know, them, you know, sending aid to Taiwan and military aid and preparing the war theater and trying to bring the Philippines in, and the Japan, you know, talk the Japanese and the South Koreans into taking a hostile stance towards China, and some of those initiatives have actually been partially successful. And so it's almost like a bipolar policy. But there's a third aspect to it all. A major war against China or Russia or somebody, like a major war, not a small, you know, invading Grenada or, you know, something like that, but a major war would also allow the establishment in power to sweep much of the political and economic and social crisis in the United States under the carpet, to say, oh, you know, so your pension's not being paid out, well, you know, we're at war and you can't get your health care, you know, blame the Chinese. And you know, it would, you know, a major war allows you to deal with your opposition in a fast and violent way. You can eliminate the dissidents. You can crack down hard on freedom of speech. You can do all kinds of things in you know, behind the smoke screen of war. Because people can always, if somebody is in your opposition, you can always label them as unpatriotic, as traitors. You can silence the opposition, and the war generally has the effect of getting people to close ranks behind their leadership, even if they hate them otherwise, because you perceive that you have external enemy that are actually a threat to your way of life and to your life itself. And then you tend to kind of defer to the people in power. So a major war would also be a way to shore up their position in power, and to prevent any challenge of them, any challenge to them from gaining any traction.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you. This was an excellent chat. It was an excellent talk. I gotta bring you back on here when you get some free time. I really enjoyed this chat, and I just want to tell you thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Rashid. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. I will join you again very gladly, and warm greetings to all your viewers and listeners.
And I'll send you a copy of the interview shortly. Thank you so much, and be blessed.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. Take care.
All right, bye-bye. Everybody, thank you for joining us on the most powerful platform for truth, bar none, anywhere across the web, whether it be Rumble, Odyssey, Twitter, YouTube, or whatever. This is your platform for empowerment, education, and elevation. This is the Red Pill Diaries, and I'm your host, Rashid. And I'm so blessed and thankful that you chose to join me, to give me another hour of your time, to lend me your ear and your eyes, to get some information, and hopefully you process that information where it's beneficial to you and your loved ones. On that note, I gotta say, I love each and every one of you. Listen to me good. I love each and every one of you if you love truth. But know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that my God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, and this is coming from Mrs. Barber Legs, baby boy. Hey, mama, I love you more than life. Everybody, thank you for joining me. Deuces. We're out of here.